On today's episode of the podcast, I'm going to start just talking a little bit about the Russell Wilson contract, what it means, concerns I have for the Giants, and the Giants signing backups. And really, should you be doing that? Because there aren't a lot of backups to pick from. So the depth there, at least, is good for New York. We'll look at the backup market in general. The Wonder Boy, Luka Dončić. The book is out this week. The author, Tim MacMahon, will go over all of the prequel stuff to how this trade actually happened. And will we hear a retort from Brian Windhorst on their podcast and life advice. It's March. It's 2025. Where is your backup quarterback awareness for the NFL? Mine is locked in right now. I was looking at a list the other day, and I was like, man, that list seems bleak. Still a few moves to be made. I don't know if it's just in the moment going, that doesn't look good, where if I did the exercise every single March, every single year, I'd be like, that doesn't look good. But this just feels bad. We're going to get to some of the backup quarterback options here in a second, but let's start with a starter, I guess, and that's Russell Wilson to your New York Giants. So the deal was first reported as 1 year, $21 million. That's not going to happen. It's $10.5 million guaranteed. The incentives are going to make him a few million more if he plays every game, if he wins a bunch of games. But to make the full 21, the stuff that I was looking at this morning, again, a lot of this stuff is very misleading on the headline. It looks good for the agent. It looks good for the player. But like, hey, $20 million for Russ. Be like, yep. He would have to win, I think, like every game and then make the playoffs. And if you go undefeated, chances are you're going to be in the playoffs. So clearly he's going to make a few million more. I would imagine he is the starter based on him deciding to sign there, even though Jameis Winston was just signed for 2 years and like $8 million base. So when you just look at the numbers, you're like, okay, Wilson clearly the priority. And then still the scenario of whether or not the Giants would take a quarterback with their pick at the top of the first round. So why would the Giants do this? Because I've seen a couple different theories, and let's try to explore all of them. Is it because of the lack of quarterback depth around the league? Because it feels like every year a couple guys get hurt. There's a very repeated talking point of there's just not enough quarterbacks, right? There's just not enough quarterback. I just feel like right now, and then coming off of the anticipation, so I shouldn't say coming off of this draft because it hasn't actually happened, but we already know, like, this is not the greatest quarterback draft. The depth of actually guys who are going to be taken, it's just not the same as a lot of other years. So are we seeing teams more desperate to sign some names to become a backup? Or in this case, the Giants quarterback room, where it's like, let's just bring somebody in here, at least at one point from a talent perspective, we liked, who flamed out somewhere else as a first-round pick, or Russell Wilson, who, let's get to the debate on who he is right now. At least there's something there. As Eric Mangini told me once, when he was talking about, I think it was Matt Castle. We were sitting there on the show, and we were thinking about different quarterback options, and he said something that I'll never forget. And Mangini was like, at the very least, when you're desperate, the tiebreaker is, has this guy actually ever done it before? And for Wilson, we know the resume, even if it's heading in the wrong direction. So the old saying goes, because right now the Giants have 2 quarterbacks, and with the draft, they could have 3. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you have 0. It's a really clever line. It's also kind of stupid because I'd rather have 2 than 0. I think all of us would rather that. So we understand the dynamic of having to change your mind all the time. The Rob Johnson, Doug Flutie thing was actually bad for the Bills. So it was bad ultimately when they made their final decision, but you get the point. Like, there's just a lot of extra stuff. Like, I remember having a debate with somebody about, if you had a couple top 10 picks, should you just take 2 quarterbacks? And that way you have a better chance of getting it right, considering the burnout rate of these guys that are taken in the first round. It's like, I understand the math part of that, but the reality is all of a sudden you're bringing in an unprecedented dynamic of having 2 top 10 picks or 2 first-round picks. If any team were actually to ever do this, be like, yeah, we're breaking camp. These guys are splitting reps, and may the best man win. And the chances are one guy is absolutely not built for that, and you've already fucked up his career before it even started. So Wilson, he's limited, right? He's limited to where he can throw. He's limited on what I think offensive coordinators trust him with. He is somebody that physically it would make sense that he's not the dynamic athlete that he was before, the guy that could keep plays alive when it looked like they were about to dive. He would find ways to complete passes on third down. I used to just love him where it was like everything looks like it's done And now you have to figure out a way to make something up here. And I thought he was like one of the best in the game at doing it. It's been a long time since we've seen that consistently delivered on Sundays. The Steelers slide is not all on him. I think that was unfair, whether it was Pickens' missing game or the defense falling apart. Pittsburgh at one point was 10-3. And then we had to start talking about them as a team that could win the AFC. And then it becomes like dismissive. Like, why can't the Steelers do it? Like, look at the history. Look at the defense. Look at, I don't know. Well, we look at the rest of the AFC, and considering what the rest of the landscape looked like and the quarterbacks that Pittsburgh was going to have to go through with Russell Wilson taking over for Fields, like a very honest conversation was, yeah, that would seem to be a huge surprise despite the 10-3 record and the defensive numbers they were putting up. But the slide wasn't just on Wilson, even though it played out that way, because that's what happens with quarterbacks all the time. Think about it. Through 10 games, they were number 2 in opponents' points per game. They were giving up 16 a game. The next 8, including the playoffs, they gave up 26.6 points per game. So they're giving up almost actually more than 10 points per game over that stretch. And somehow that was all Wilson's fault. If you think about Wilson and where he is in the market, I think it's always a good reminder that the NFL, the people who make these personnel decisions, tell us what the league thinks about who a player is at this stage of his career. Wilson was available cheap last year for Pittsburgh, but it wasn't like somebody said, hey, let's do some kind of long-term thing here. We'll give you short money in the first year because all the money's coming in from Denver. He made $38 million from Denver last season, so that's why he was basically free for Pittsburgh. But it wasn't like there was a bunch of teams going, oh my God, I can't believe this guy's available, and he's going to be free the first year, but let's make sure we have some team protections because we think he's going to be really good. That didn't happen. And then it's happening all over again. And the fact that it's base for 1 year at $10 million from the Giants, again, the NFL is telling you, we think this guy's done. So the question for the Giants here, because I have concerns, is are the Giants the last team to know that it's over for Wilson? And over in the sense that, not that he can't play or shouldn't be on a team, because again, I think it's worth repeating a lot of the stuff that was talked about with him and how much was his fault and how much blame we should have put on him for that slide. I don't know. I mean, look, I didn't love all of it either, but it was really I thought it was really, really unfair because I think there's just so many unbelievably stubborn Justin Fields fans out there. But, look, the Giants aren't, whatever you think of the Giants, and I know a lot of people like to make fun of Joe Shane in the front office and say these guys are morons after Saquon Barkley has this historic year with the Eagles, but the point stands. The decision was about the Giants needing Saquon Barkley and needing to invest that kind of money in a running back when the rest of the team, they probably weren't going to do that much because they were kind of taking a gap year here with Daniel Jones because they'd already paid him all this money. It felt like kind of a wash year for the Giants, and they were making decisions that way. And as much as Saquon was one of the most impressive single offensive stories in the entire league this year, it just didn't really make a lot of sense for the Giants. So it's easy to make fun of them, point and laugh and whatever you want to do, but it felt a lot like a guy who can't pay his rent buying an expensive watch if the Giants are going to pay Saquon Barkley a ton of money at a position that you probably shouldn't be spending a ton of money on if you don't think the rest of the team is going to be that good, even though there's a lot of people on this roster I actually really like. But I don't think Saquon was going to make the difference. And certainly it was a little bit different, him running behind the Eagles offensive line than the Giants. So are the Giants the last to know about Russell Wilson, or are they, again, looking around at this position going, well, we bring in Winston, we bring in Wilson, and on top of everything else, we may draft somebody. So at a position that may have the worst depth that we've seen in years, do we have a bunch of different options? And if you want to criticize that and say, well, what kind of QB room is that? You're not wrong, but I'm just trying to understand why they would do some of these things with declining players. Concern number 2 is Russ in New York. So I think he's toned it down quite a bit since the Sean Payton year in Denver. I think the first year when he felt like he was finally free and was going to be the full version of Russell Wilson, it was probably the peak annoying. If you like it, you're a better man than I am. But clearly Payton hated it immediately. There was going to be some kind of like reset on what Russell Wilson was allowed to do, what he was going to be allowed to be. I don't know. Look, it was kind of like, man, now Broncos country, let's ride. But it got annoying. And it's always going to be a little weird. It's always going to be a little annoying with him. That's just the Russell Wilson experience. All right. But I did think this was really interesting because I think about him being in New York and wondering, is this kind of a fulfillment of something that he had talked about but not talked about years ago? Remember back it's February of 21, I'm bringing up the story now. Headline, quarterback Russell Wilson hasn't demanded a trade from Seahawks agent says. Mark Rodgers tells ESPN Adam Schefter on Thursday, Rodgers said Wilson has told the Seahawks that he wants to play in Seattle, but if a trade were considered, the only teams he would go to are the Dallas Cowboys, New Orleans Saints, Las Vegas Raiders, and Chicago Bears, which was really one of the weirdest stories ever. It's like, we're not demanding a trade, but these cities would make sense. And if you talk to enough people, it'd be like, okay, what specifically is it about those cities? And I think a lot of it had to do with the full Russell and his wife experience, essentially being like, which markets would make the most sense for both of them. And clearly, like New York, there's a Page 6 article already today about their first night in New York City. So I think I think it has a lot to do with wanting to be in New York and whatever the next chapter is for this couple. Yeah, I think that's like a huge priority, which I'm not like saying, hey, don't go out, don't be famous. But if I'm running a football team, that's going to make me a little worried about the whole thing. And like I said, there's just always going to be a little extra stuff that, isn't great. It's like, hey, is this going to be about football every week, or is this going to be about maximizing your celebrity? And I think if we're all being a little honest, it's probably a mix. Concern number 3, the locker room's going to like Jameis more, just like Pittsburgh liked Fields more. I think he's an unrelatable dude. And to have Winston in there, who thought he was probably going to be the starter, and then this Wilson deal happens, I don't know if Winston's a locker room politician. I think he just might be really likable in a country way that relates to way more football players on a 53-man roster. And then on top of that, like, what if you draft Shedeur Sanders at number 3? Like, I kind of want this to happen because you're going to have some strong personalities. And is that the best thing for a rookie quarterback if you decide to go down that road? Who knows? Maybe they trade out of the pick and then try to add some more picks. So I think the last part of this is, last year was a gap year with Daniel Jones. They were hoping maybe like one more chance. You want to talk about the all-time tryout for a quarterback. It's going to be tough to break the Daniel Jones experiment record. And maybe the positive is after knowing like this season's kind of lost with Jones, because it went more likely that it ended up going the way more people thought it would go than all of a sudden this miraculous turnaround. If you draft a QB, now I guess you have 3 options, which gets back to the original line of like, how many options do you really have? Even though I think the line is clever and pretty misleading. Maybe it has to do with the backups. And that's where we started this conversation. If you look at the backups in this league, God, this feels like it's worse than before. I mean, there was a tweet the other day where somebody was ranking them. They had Zach Wilson 3rd, which I think that feels a little high. But Miami actually was proactive about this with Tua's injury history, knowing, okay, you really need somebody you can kind of trust if you want to get kind of like the Jacoby Brissett thing in Arizona. Like if Jacoby has to play for a month, if Kyler gets hurt, and Kyler was, much better last year than all of the ups and downs stuff that we've seen from him health-wise, but Kyler for the most part stayed healthy. The expectation is he's probably going to miss some time. If Brissett has to play for a month, you at least feel like you have a chance. Zach Wilson has the 2nd worst passer rating of any active quarterback with 15 or more starts. And the Dolphins were like, we got him. You have Garoppolo back in L.A. Shanahan in San Francisco wanted Mac Jones. They were like, sweet. Cooper Rush goes to Baltimore. Teddy Bridgewater's in Detroit. Stidham got a 2-year deal with Denver to keep him there. I know Kirk Cousins is like the best backup, but that's kind of weird. But maybe that's why Atlanta's going to be stubborn and hang on for a little while. I mean, I know everybody loves Joe Milton videos. I like Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor was ranked 7th on one list. He should be like, I miss Gardner Minshew, Is Spencer Rattler the man now? Is Malik Willis the dude? Or is this how it is a bunch of different years? But I think that's kind of what it is, man. Like, there's not a lot of depth of the position. But the question for the Giants is, do you have a ton of depth and no starter? The Ryen Russillo podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the final stretch of the NBA season, and the playoff picture is changing by the minute. Every three-pointer or fourth quarter comeback means that much more. And with live betting on FanDuel, you can make the playoff picture a little prettier. So whether you're looking to ride with a hot shooter or think a team is due for a run, you can get in on the action until the final buzzer with America's #1 sports book. It might be just overtime for some of these teams, and I'm not talking about extra time in a game after four quarters. I'm talking about it is just over. So I don't love laying 13 points with Houston in a game, but they are at Utah. And if you go through it right now, it's just tough to pick any of these teams that are trying to tank out the rest of the season. I mean, they lost by 37 to Memphis. They lost by 29 to Cleveland. They lost by 22. I mean, if you look at their losses, other than that Washington win, who needs to lose worse than they do, they're getting just stomped. So normally laying double digits, I mean, even laying 7+, I don't love, but it might be the move looking at this final stretch of 10 games or so. However you want to play, now is the perfect time to join. New FanDuel customers get started with $200 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com/Ryen, RYEN to join today. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 and older and present in select states, or 18+ and present in D.C. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. A bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit rg-help.com. The book is out now, and the timing is perfect. The Wonder Boy, Luka Dončić, and the author Tim MacMahon joins us now. Tim from ESPN, and also the Neutral Corner on the Hoop Collective podcast with Brian Windhorst and Tim Bontemps. What's up, man? It's good to see you.
Howdy, partner. I appreciate you having me. Neutral corner, I don't know. I think I'm more the instigator. I enjoy when those guys spar a little bit, and frankly, Bontemps is an inviting punching bag.
I enjoy the pod. I mean, it's one of the few that I consistently am like always checking in on, just because I think when you do the job, especially 3 pods a week, you're like, okay, I've done what I don't know that I want to listen to anybody else talk about the same things that I just got done talking with. But look, you guys have all covered the league a long time. You add perspective that I certainly can't always add. And look, you're the guy that I wanted to hear from when the Luka trade went down, and perfect timing. You're writing a book about him. So there's a bunch of different ways I could go, but I guess I don't want to do a ton of Mavs history as much as I want to get into the Luka timeline, because I was reading the final chapter that was added to it. And it's funny as I'm reading it, it's like, okay, here's another calf strain, and this is calf strain number 4, and this one's going to be even worse. And now there's a medical team situation where his group is fired, but then the new group won't share MRIs with the team. So like, you're laying out the timeline of this massive disconnect to further explain how we got here and Nico trading him to the Lakers. But then ultimately, like, every time I start understanding, like, oh, okay, this makes a little bit, then it's like, yeah, I still can't believe they did this. So let's go back to when you think the disconnect first started.
So honestly, and look, like, obviously the conditioning has always been a thing, a concern with Luke, even back before the draft. But in terms of the disconnect with the Mavericks organization, I think a massive thing that happened that was under the radar at the time, and I'm going to say this and people can be like, really? But when they fired Casey Smith, who was one of the most respected people in the entire league in the athletic training field, he was the Mavericks head athletic trainer for years and years and years, became, oversaw that group, the health and performance group, as part of the front office. He was a critical part of the culture of the Mavericks, of the fabric of the Mavericks, was there for 20 years, is one of Dirk Nowitzki's best friends, was tight with Jason Kidd. He's now working for the New York Knicks. Not a coincidence. Jalen Brunson loved him. So did Luka. And that happened in August 2023. And I reported at the time he was reassigned to, sit at home and twiddle his thumbs for the final year of his contract. I reported it then, but didn't really dive into it, because I was like, okay, I think this is going to be a big thing. Let's see, it's going to be part of a bigger story. Let's see how it develops. Well, and then they went to the finals, right? So it's like, well, I guess it didn't have major immediate ramifications. Then Nico also fired their longtime strength coach, Jeremy Holsopple, their longtime manual therapist, massage therapist, Casey Spangler. Again, all people who predated Luka in Dallas, all people who had great relationships with Luka in Dallas, all people who were part of him making this massive cultural transition from Europe as a teenager to not just America and Dallas, but to the NBA, all inner circle people for him who he liked, but more importantly, he respected, he trusted. And then Nico brought in, people who were referred to around the Mavericks as Nico's guys. And Luka didn't know them, didn't particularly like them, didn't trust them. Now, Luka does have his own body team, which started last year. But the working, and that's not unusual, right? You know that. Like for a superstar to have his own guys, whether it's a massage therapist, strength coach, physical therapist, whatever. Like a lot of these superstars have these, body teams. Often they're good working relationships with the teams, with the franchise. That wasn't the case this year, and that was part of the lead up to this trade. And then, obviously the fourth calf strain in a 28-month span. Nico certainly was frustrated, feeling like, hey, you're not taking care of your body. You're not putting in the work. You're not doing the preparation. This is kind of what happens. Luka's side would say, well, we rushed back from the calf strain in training camp that, by the way, you reported as a contusion to get ready, and then rushed back from a heel bruise just before Christmas, was playing on our tippy toe or on his tippy toes. And stuff happens. It's unfortunate. Whatever side you want to take, this all leads to just Nico being so frustrated, feeling like we can't invest in this guy, can't invest this Supermax deal, and trading him while he really only got one bid. I mean, he didn't, flat out only got one bid.
Yeah.
So you gave up on this generational talent who was at the time 25, about to turn 26. And people I've talked to around the league, there's two camps. One, you just can't give up on that kind of a talent unless you've got the proverbial gun to your head. You have to trade him, which was not the case here. Two, there are people who say, you know what, I get wanting to get out of the Luka business because of these concerns, but you have to maximize the return. And I have not talked to a single person outside of the Mavericks organization who feels like Dallas did that.
Do you think that Nico, and it's described as, I don't know if obsession of Kobe is fair, if you wanted to say admiration of Kobe, but the fact that Nico was so tight with Kobe, the Pelinka relationship that I do want to get to here, was Nico holding, sometimes the Kobe, mythology though I can find personally annoying as if he's the only player who was ever in the gym early. Like he's just, like it was him and then everybody else was behind him. And when it came to work ethic, but was that something that made Nico pursue like an unobtainable story for Luka? Like, did that get in the way of his evaluation?
It's certainly the standard for Nico, right? And Nico had relationships with a lot of guys over the years at Nike. None like he did with Kobe. I mean, he worked his way up the ranks at Nike, in large part by being Kobe's guy and then working up from there. And look, when Kyrie tore his ACL about a month after the trade, Nico puts out a statement and he references Kobe in the statement, talking about, I've praising Kyrie's work ethic, but bringing up Kobe as the comparison. And Nico said, I've lived it. So yes, there is this relationship that Nico had with Kobe. Basically, that's his vision of the superstar. That's his vision of a face of the franchise. That's his standard, high standard for work ethic. And, listen, Luka doesn't fit into that mold. Like, Luka does enjoy to have a post-game brewski or two-ski or six-ski. Like Luka, I mean, the man is going to eat steak and potatoes, and the weight fluctuates, and all of these kind of things. He's a 5-time first-team All-NBA selection who's yet to hit his prime years. He averaged 34, 10, and 9, led the league in scoring, led the Mavs to the finals, while, by the way, playing the most minutes over the regular season and playoffs of anybody in the NBA. And, honestly, he had Kobe's stamp of approval. I mean, sadly, the last NBA game that Kobe attended was courtside at Staples Center then. And yes, that's the scene where he's famously started talking some trash in Slovenia when Luka was about to inbound the ball. Luka turns around, and it's Kobe, with his daughter, with Gigi, and Gigi's favorite player was Luka Dončić. Kobe brought his daughter to the game to see Luka. Kobe and Luka had a moment after the game, and I mean, Kobe loved the kid's game. Now, look, obviously he wasn't with him on a day-to-day basis, evaluating the work ethic, but again, Luka's not the first superstar who's, had a little bit, had a healthy appetite and who, maybe didn't enjoy the rigorous, mundane preparation details and who would have an adult beverage or three or four. So the production, to me, that kind of production gives a guy a lot of leeway. But again, Nico's bet is that the body's going to break down in his prime. And he feared giving him the Supermax, and he punted on him, I would say prematurely.
So the other part of this is the relationship with Pelinka. And this is the thing that I will forever be fascinated with. It's just those GM moments, like the rest of us who've never done it, who talk about it nonstop, like, oh, this guy should have done this, he should have done this. And it's like, man, I just wonder what it would be like to be in that position. It's like, you have to say yes or no to this, like, team altering thing. And, normally it would be an easy answer for something like this, but because he's so close with Pelinka, you have to think if there's years of frustration since Nico first entered the building with Luka, like he's sharing that with Pelinka, and there's other.
It wasn't a secret around the league. I'll say that. Luka's weight fluctuates was not some kind of like, oh, really? Gee whiz, who would have ever known?
But I guess like once it's finally addressed at a hotel in Dallas when the Lakers are in town, and it's gone from I want AD to would you consider AD for Luka, Pelinka is operating from a position of strength based on the information. There's just no way over the course of those years that, if you're all of these 30 guys are competing with each other, there's no way that you're not like, and that kind of gets into the how much can you actually talk, which relationships actually are friendships. Really, maybe none of them should be friendships, but there has to be part of Pelinka that's think, okay, he's like real about this. He's upset. And then of course Pelinka's saying, well, if we have to keep it a secret, then as you point out in the book, I can't know if he'll do an extension with us, which I think is like the funniest thing. So now I don't have to pay as much. And the whole thing, it just feels like Nico, that relationship worked Nico when we're actually talking about the price paid for somebody like Luka.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And look, that relationship obviously also goes back to the relationship with Kobe. Rob Pelinka was Kobe's longtime agent. Nico was his right-hand man at Nike. Those three traveled the world together. Got to have a real bond, and Nico could trust Pelinka to keep things secret. Of course, was it in Pelinka's best interest to keep things secret? Absolutely. Because and then he could use the card that you just mentioned. Hey, I can't check with Bill Duffy, Luka's agent. Well, if I can't call Duff, I mean, how do I know that he'll want to stick around to play in sunny Southern California for the most glamorous franchise in NBA history while one of his good buddies is coaching the team? I mean, gee whiz, could the Lakers, how are we, can the Lakers attract talent to play with him? It's always been so difficult. Like, geez, we're taking such a risk here. And he walked away with a 2031 pick in his pocket, with the 2030 swap in his pocket. Dalton Connect wasn't part of the deal. You whatever you want to say. So yeah, Pelinka keeping it secret. Nico wanted to do it because he felt like he had to blindside Luka, and has it right in the book. After 6 years of the Mavericks kissing Luka's butt, he did get shanked in the back. It's absolutely what happened here. Felt like he had to blindside Luka. Felt like he had to blindside Bill Duffy. And I would argue that it worked against him. And, the other thing is I think the fear of the Supermax was poor logic, was extremely flawed logic. Nico talking about it's going to be a tumultuous summer. Number one, like Luka was signing the Supermax, and Nico knew that. Luka was about to close on his forever home in Dallas, and that was known throughout the organization. He was not going to turn down the biggest contract in NBA history. There were teams that were, lining up just in case, but Luka was staying in Dallas. They feared it as an investment, which to me is, wow. Like, even if you think the body's going to break down, look what Kevin Durant got in the trade market in his 30s after he'd had an Achilles and missed a whole bunch of games for other injuries with the Nets. If you have Luka locked up on a long-term deal, that means you've got to stick in the relationship for another year and a half. You've got to deal with having perennial MVP candidate on your roster for another season and a half. And the things that you don't like about him. But could you imagine if in the summer of what it would be 2026, the Mavericks basically announced to the league, hey, we're trading Luka before training camp. So what kind of bidding war do you think would have started after that?
Yeah, in a league where you hope damaged goods, not always number one option, is this guy going to have 30 or 0 in a playoff game, Paul George? When you hope that he takes your $200 million, then you do a Supermax for Luka. Like, think about the deals where teams have cap space and they're like, man, maybe we can get Thaddeus Young on a 3-year deal. And that's the part where I can't understand somebody who spent a life in basketball, even if more of it was on the outside. But, Nico had a really good track record. And for you to start getting cute with what you want to do, it's like, no, you hope he wants a Supermax. And even if he blew out an ACL, you'd still be able to trade Luka during the Supermax to another team and recoup some of that because he'd still be south of 30. It felt really personal. Like I can't help but I'll never stop thinking how I felt when I saw Michael Finley grab the beer from Luka. And I don't know Michael Finley. Obviously, he was an awesome player. It seems like he has a really good reputation as a guy who takes shit really seriously. But I thought he was embarrassing his guy there. And then I didn't understand if Finley was doing it so that it made Michael Finley look like the winner, or it's like, look how serious I'm taking this. And you can tell me I'm totally wrong, but I thought that moment, it bothered me because I was like, why would you even allow, if you don't want him to do this, fine. Maybe he didn't know the camera was there. That seems hard to believe.
Well, no, because it was one guy with a cell phone. Right.
Okay. So he didn't know.
I don't know if he saw the cell phone or not. I think it was just
probably not.
I think that was it's a moment that was, frankly, it was funny at the time, and then now in hindsight, it's like, oh. But I think people might be making too much of that moment. I haven't actually talked to Finn about it, but I think it was just more of like, hey, not in the hallway, man. Hey. Okay. Don't be drinking a beer out here for everybody to see. Behind closed doors, cool, but not in the hallway. That was my read on it. At least I don't
taking it away from him though. A man taking another man's beer away like that to prove some kind of point.
Listen,
I think that's a little weird.
Well, especially because Luka is an adopted Texan, and you don't take a man's beer out of his hand in Texas. That's for damn sure. But I do believe that Michael Finley was a strong supporter of Luka from start to finish. I would say that.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad we got that out there. Let's talk about new ownership. We all know a new ownership syndrome is a real thing, and it's almost unavoidable. The first 12 to 18 months, you are guaranteed to do something really stupid. And now we've got the stepson, Patrick, being the face of this whole thing. I think you pointed out perfectly in the book for him to use, it was very clear to basketball people that you're saying Luka does not meet the standard of what the Dallas Mavericks expect, does not meet the standard of a Jordan, of a Bird, of a Shaq being the worst example of somebody who brought it every day, lunch pail, put in all the work, all the offseason stuff. And look, you even go in on the Bird Jordan thing. You want to talk about the stuff away from the facility where it's like these guys are not super locked in. I think Patrick has had a really good run, and maybe he's brilliant in his field, but he thought he could get away with the tech Zoom conference buzzwords of this space and maximizing that for basketball people, when you're using those analogies, you just kind of, it concerns your fan base to being like, do we have an absolute fraud imposter?
Well, and I just don't think the guy knows much about basketball. And there's this, like, all these conspiracy theories. Oh, this is the management demanded this because they're trying to depress the value of the franchise to move it to Vegas. Like, this is QAnon whack job stuff. Like, no, that's not what happened. Nico Harrison managed up, right? Nico Harrison convinced Patrick Dumont, a guy who is a year in to having control of an NBA franchise, that, hey, we've got to get rid of this guy. Luka doesn't work hard. Luka's bad for the culture. The Supermax would be a terrible investment. He convinced Dumont of that, and he'd earned Dumont's trust because, listen, the moves that Nico made before the deadline last year, which, by the way, at the time, it wasn't like people were talking about the Mavs made great moves around the league. There was a lot of questions about them. But Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington ended up being critical pieces to a team that caught fire down the stretch of the regular season and made a finals run. So Nico had built up some credibility, a lot of credibility, I would say, with Patrick Dumont based on the success of his first transaction cycle with Dumont in control of the team. But, I mean, Dumont doesn't know much about basketball. That's pretty clear. He also doesn't have, he doesn't have a great feel for public speaking.
The problem is, though, is because everything has worked out for him. Like, I know who these guys are. He's like, oh, I can just go up on the stage and dazzle them. And you're like, dude, if you don't grow up with this, like, you can't Cliff Notes the NBA world in front of NBA people and pull it off. Like, maybe you can at some of these other business things, but like, sorry I interrupted, but like, it's unbelievable to think like, yeah, I can just go up here and put on a suit and they'll figure, like, I got this.
Sure. And when he made those comments we're talking about, it was in an interview with Brad Townsend of the Dallas Morning News. It was the day after the Anthony Davis's abbreviated Mavericks debut. So that the first home game following the trade, when there was that huge protest outside the arena, and sell the team, F Nico. They even said some nasty things about me, which wasn't very nice. One of them was don't buy the book, which I do appreciate the free publicity. But anyways, that protest was held in the shadows of a statue of a gentleman named Dirk Nowitzki. And if you need to check on the spelling, the street right there is Nowitzki Way, right? And on that statue, 21 letters summing up 21 seasons. Man, the man's game. Loyalty never fades away. If you're going to start naming NBA legends who are like the epitome of discipline and hard work, and your target audience is a Dallas fan base, and you leave Dirk out of that, oh my God. It was honestly one of the worst PR moves I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Cuban's role in this, because as you recently pointed out on a pod, it was being sold to everybody that Cuban was still in charge. As he was saying those things, other teams were like, why does everybody just keep rolling with this? Not because they felt like, hey, we need to be they were just fascinated with the assumption, which is a bad one, that, okay, I've given up majority position of this team, but I'm still going to be in charge of these decisions.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know. That's not usually how it works out. Can you give us better insight into why it was handled that way and why Cuban was willing to sell something that clearly wasn't going to be true very soon?
Well, Cuban's claim at this point is that they had a gentleman's agreement that wasn't followed through on. Listen, with Cuban, you always have to, like, you can't. Well, one of my favorite Jerry Jones sayings, I call them Jerryisms, is just because I say it doesn't make it so. Well, just because Cuban says it doesn't make it so. So you never know if what he's telling you is the truth. So I don't know if there was a gentleman's agreement that they just kind of backed out on. I don't know if Cuban was completely full of crap when he was telling everybody, hey, they're real estate people. I'm a basketball person. I'm running basketball. Or he was trying to speak something into existence. But what I do know is that as the ink dried on that deal, Cuban was done calling shots for basketball. Cuban did not call shots going into the trade deadline. And frankly, at this point, Cuban has no more influence on personnel decisions than any other rich dude who has courtside season tickets. He got a 5-minute heads up via text from Nico that this trade's going down. Try to talk him out of it, too late. He got a phone call from Dumont after it was over. And I was told that was about a 2-minute phone call. Great. So thanks for touching base. What the hell do you want to talk about? So this never happens if Cuban doesn't give up the majority share of the franchise. I mean, honestly, if Nico would have gone to Cuban when he was running the show and said, hey, I'm negotiating a trade for Luka, I think it would have been a fireable offense. Cuban's, the first 5.5 years of Luka's career that Cuban was calling shots, Cuban's top priority was doing everything in his power to make Luka as happy as possible. And I would say rightfully so. I don't think the execution was always the smoothest, but I think when you get that kind of a franchise player, when you get that kind of a prodigy, yes, they've got to be the priority. Everything does revolve around them. That's just reality in the NBA. And that took a sudden shift this summer.
You have that in the book where Cuban tries to talk Nico out of it. Is there anything more on that brief conversation you can share with us?
I think it was just a text exchange. And I don't know the specifics of it. It's just Cuban basically saying, you can't do this. And Nico saying it's done. I don't think there was a whole lot of back and forth there.
The book starts with just a reminder of what this world was going to be for Luka, right? 19 years old, this insane profile of success in the EuroLeague and winning. And, it's funny because I remember that draft, watching him going, God, it goes slow, but it always works.
Yes.
It always works. And it did remind me of very Hardenish approach to possessions of, it's going to go slow in a second, but I'm going to figure out a way. And it's actually going to still end up being kind of the best look. But here's somebody coming to a foreign country. He'd never been to Texas. He steps foot. Now it's this press conference. He's there with Jalen Brunson. Donnie Nelson's having his moment and this whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
And that, there's always a concern when you've never seen as big and as special as he is in all the video, right? It was a pretty good chance he was going to be a really nice player. But the fact that he could become the face of this franchise, and on top, my argument is always, hey, there's all these guys that score that have never done anything in the playoffs, and we're still wondering who they can be. And yet Luka has the 22 run, more importantly, the 24 run. So whatever flaws you think you may have, it's not like this is a dude who can't get out of the first round in his first 7 seasons. He's actually getting this team probably beyond what people had thought, especially the 22 team.
Well, and with completely different supporting casts.
Right. And so he is, we can make it about rings, but for Luka, it's not really about rings to this point. It would have been, say he's ringless at 30, then we can do all the fair and sometimes unfair stuff that we do with the best players in the world. But the fact that he had delivered this way, embraced Dallas, embraced all of these things. Did you see how, I guess the best way to describe that, for the audience here that hasn't read the book yet, of just him actually exceeding every single part of who can this guy be for the franchise?
Well, and look, Luka was the most accomplished, decorated teenage prospect ever to come out of Europe. And you can argue he was also extremely misevaluated by the NBA. 3 teams passed on this guy, right? One of whom, the Phoenix Suns, had just hired Igor Kosheskov as their head coach. This is the guy who was the Slovenian national team coach when 17-year-old Luka is the co-star of Goran Dragic of a team that won Eurobasket. Slovenia has 2 million people. But it's like if there's a tournament of all the states in America and Idaho wins it, right? It's insane. And Igor had never been a head coach, wasn't coach there for very long, just 1 year. They never asked his opinion. He finally goes to Robert Sarver and says, listen, man, I just got to get this off my chest so I can sleep. We've got to draft Luka. We've got this cap space, throw a big offer sheet on the table, get him Clint Capella, get him a rim running center. Luka, Booker, Capella, that's our core we can build. And it's thanks for your input. you'll coach the guys we give you. We're going with this guy who is from Arizona. Robert Sarver, the Arizona alum. Yeah, no, I'm taking the 7-footer who is from Arizona. And like a lot of people did have DeAndre Ayton number 1 in the draft. Then Vlade, Balkan basketball legend, had known Sasha Dončić for decades, Luka's dad. One, I was told by a scout who was in the room that Vlade, quote, knew too much, that he knew, hey, Luka likes to have a good time. The discipline's not the best, all those sort of things, which frankly, Sasha is kind of like I call him the Charles Barkley of Slovenia,
legend,
big gregarious personality. Yes. Likes to have a good time, yeah. So knew all that. But then Vlade didn't think he was a superstar. Well, he'd take touches away from De'Aaron Fox. We don't want that. Marvin Bagley III, Vlade said on draft night, is a better player and a better fit. Well, not sure about either of those, buddy. And by the way, Luka remembers last year Vlade was sitting courtside in Sacramento, and after Luka iced a win, he's sneering over there. He's going back to the bench talking about, that guy should have drafted me. That guy should have drafted me. And then the Hawks, they had Luka a little bit above Trae Young on their board. But hey, if we can get an extra lottery pick out of it, okay, let's do it. And lo and behold, the Mavericks, who had an epic tank job that cost Cuban $600,000 when he said the quiet part out loud, then got booted back by the lottery gods a couple spots, were able to move back up and get the guy who Donnie Nelson was absolutely pounding the table for, as he did Giannis when Cuban didn't listen in that draft. And maybe more importantly, in terms of Cuban's decision-making, this gambling dude who'd been consulting for him on the sly, Bob Voulgaris, and he brought up Harden. That's exactly who he brought up. This guy's going to be an MVP candidate at some point relatively soon. And James Harden was the comp. And, I do still think prime James Harden is the best comp for Luka. You can argue that Luka has surpassed that as a player already, but that's how Luka ended up in Dallas. Again, went third in the draft, but was misevaluated. People didn't think he could be a point guard in the NBA. People didn't think he could be a primary ball handler.
I'm glad you talked about the conspiracy theory in the book and then shared a little here, because it was so well done by somebody who looked like they'd had a little juice. And I had buddies, reaching out, being like, hey, this is probably what happened here. And I'm like, well, you live in Vermont and you don't know anything about the NBA. So I don't know that your approval is what he's looking for. I go, the idea that they would major league this thing so that they can move to Vegas and then leave Dallas without an NBA franchise doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. The fact that they wouldn't want an expansion fee from a new group on the Vegas team and then who the 32nd team ends up being. Now, if you want to say, hey, maybe they were going to say, well, the expansion people can have Dallas and then we get to go to Vegas because of all of our business interests. It was a really, really well thought out, delivered conspiracy theory that, again, didn't make any sense. Because
people didn't believe the reasoning for the Mavericks to make this trade. They couldn't wrap their minds around it. They're like, there has to be something more. Okay, the conditioning's a problem. Like, Luka can be a little bit difficult. Like, you just went to the finals with a guy leading the league in scoring and averaging damn near a triple-double. And that's the thing. It wasn't about, with Luka, it wasn't about potential. He was proven. He's a proven perennial MVP candidate. It's not like, you're trading a 25-year-old who, well, if he works on his conditioning, he has a chance to be one of the best players in the league. No, he's been one of the best players in the league despite conditioning issues. If he works on his conditioning, holy crap.
Well, that's the thing that I was left with, because when everyone is one way, right? It's like, imagine a scenario where Luka's so hurt that in 4 years, Nico goes, I was right. And the problem is that he could be right about that part. He could be right about the evaluation of Luka. It's malpractice for the execution on the business side of it. And so even if he ends up, in that, I just love asking myself these questions. We're like, hey, remember 3 years ago, everybody thought this, or, is there something happening right now? Do you imagine if this is the end of this story? And I think we all have to allow for it to happen, but it is consistently, there'll never be a moment where I feel like the execution of the business part of it is ever going to be able to be defended.
Well, we talked about he didn't maximize the return simply by his own admission. Honestly, his own, he was very proud of keeping it top secret and nobody being, other teams not knowing about it. You can't maximize the return operating that way. And look, I almost feel bad for Anthony Davis because he is a top 75 all-time player who is still an absolutely dominant force, right? Like it ain't like he's some kind of scrub or something. I mean, he is a first ballot Hall of Famer. But if you're trading Luka because you're concerned about durability, well, AD has durability concerns.
Yeah.
Luka was hurt when the trade was made. So is AD. AD rushed back to play in that first home game. I've been told maybe due to some motivation of trying to, at least not silence noise, but calm the noise. And boy, that first half, holy crap, was he good. I mean, he was dominant, but then he goes down in the third quarter and just got back on the floor. But Nico's own words, they created, and hey, biggest, most athletic front court in the NBA. If you got Kyrie, like they were going to be tough, but Nico created a 3 to 4 year time frame, and you gave up on a generational talent who was yet to hit his prime years, who was beloved by the fan base. Like, look, Luka has flaws, but don't tell Mavericks fans that. They'll call you all kinds of mean things. So you give up on a potentially decade, 12-year, 14-year runway for 3 to 4 years after you'd successfully built a contender around Luka. And in doing so, you gave up your draft capital, first round capital, 27, 28, 29, 30. You don't control any of it. And do the math in 3 to 4 years. Okay, let's get to 2028. Oklahoma City, they've got your swap rights. They gave you that pick last year so you could get Daniel Gafford. 29. Well, that's the Houston Rockets pick because they suckered Brooklyn into giving them a whole bunch of stuff, the Suns and that pick, so they could get Brooklyn could get their 2 years back. But that was from the Kyrie trade. Okay, again, good trade, but now that's the Rockets. 30, that's the San Antonio Spurs for facilitating the Grant Williams sign and trade, which moved in, paying out. But okay, whatever. You built a contender around them. And now your 3 to 4 years runs straight into when the credit cards due and the collectors are your closest geographic rivals.
It was a great way to end the book. And look, I would just tell people, check it out. It just came out this week. There's so much more in there. The Porzingis stuff is really fun. The Kyrie pursuit is great. And obviously, just learning more about Luka, the Wonder Boy, Tim MacMahon. Final thought, because those of us that are Hoop Collective fans, are we going to hear a response from LeBron's best friend, Brian Windhorst?
I'm just, I know LeBron, he never just spouts off. I'm sure he has evidence that when he ever uttered such a comment ever in his entire life, LeBron's head coach was a damn good podcaster. I don't know if you're aware of that. JJ Redick, a damn good podcaster. There's a clip floating around of Wendy's appearance on Old Man and Three with JJ Redick last year, where Wendy actually said, "I don't think LeBron likes me." So I don't know. Is that like best friend? I don't think he likes me. I don't know. Seems strange. Hell of a player though. Hell, all time great. I don't know where he was coming from on that one. Like he's dunked on a lot of dudes. I don't know why he felt the need to dunk on Wendy.
I'll tell you from personal experience. I think the first time I met Wendy, when I'm in Bristol, and then I probably made the mistake with a lot of people like, oh, this guy got hired because he's like LeBron's guy. Windhorst would go out of his way to make sure that you knew that it was like not the case in the most genuine way ever, not trying to sell or distract, deflect, whatever. He would just be like, yeah, actually, we're not really that tight. He's like, I just happened to be on the beat. I covered it. I was plugged in. I'm sure the relationship was good. But, that relationship is impossible. That relationship, unless you were only going to be part of the propaganda machine, and I'm not even saying specific to LeBron, it is impossible to keep that relationship smooth the entire time. And imagine, like, even working on this book with Luka, does he like you?
We're not working on this book on Luka, to be clear.
Luka,
we
right.
did not work together. And look, Luka and I, if you have to kiss somebody's butt, regardless of circumstances, to have a good relationship, as a reporter, that's just not going to work out. Luka and like Mavericks, there's a lot of Mavericks fans, Luka fans that are mad that I wrote a book on him. Oh, you trashed him his whole career. I didn't trash him his whole career. I've written and talked a ton about what an incredible talent this guy is. I covered him fairly and accurately, brilliance and flaws. And the flaws can be as obvious as the brilliance. And all that stuff, you've read the book, all that stuff is represented in the book. But you know what? I'm glad that I don't regret any of my reporting on him. The public confrontations we had are what they are. But can you imagine if I was just sunshine and daffodils throughout this whole book, and then the trade happens and I got to rush in a last chapter? Oh, by the way, all this stuff had been building up. You didn't read about it in the first 18 chapters. So,
hey man, congrats again on the release and all the work. And it was cool to catch up here. So thanks.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me, man. Enjoy your work. You're a legend in this podcast field, and it has been an honor to appear here.
Well, that was really nice. We can have you do my book, but hopefully it'll be contention.
I'll work with you on that one. It won't be on you.
Thanks, buddy. See you.
All right. Appreciate it. Adios, amigos.
You want details? Fine. I drive a Ferrari 355 Cabriolet. What's up? I have a ridiculous house in the South Fork. I have every toy you can possibly imagine. And best of all, kids, I am liquid. So, now you know what's possible. Let me tell you what's required.
The email address is lifeadvicerr@gmail.com for some of our older listeners. What's going on, Kyle?
Just normal stuff. Normal stuff. Just a guy without a team in a tournament.
Were you a Duke fan, Ceruti, growing up?
Feels like an insult. Nothing against, it's just like, it's a little bit of like a, hey, you seem like a Duke fan. It's like that time I told you that you seemed like a Rivian driver, which I do regret.
Dude,
but no, I was
awesome, by the way.
Ryan did not like that. He did not like that.
My buddy invested a bunch of money and he was stressed that I text him every time I see one on the road.
Wait, say that again?
My buddy invested a bunch in Rivian, and I don't know. There was a time when it was not going well, but everyone thought it was going to go well. I don't know where it is now. He hasn't been complaining about it as much. Yeah, I guess I could ask him.
Check the ticker.
I don't know what he got in at, but I remember he was stressed it every day. And every time I see him, I'd be like, dude, don't even worry. I just saw one on the road. It was a joke that I don't think he loved.
Well, that doesn't seem very nice. Where are we at?
12.53 a share.
Yeah, 5 years. Did it have some weird peak? Sure did. Whoa.
That seems low, but hey.
Yeah, it was 5 years ago. It was about $115 a share.
All right.
I think they look good.
I regret the joke too.
No, look, I think they look pretty good.
Yeah, me too.
It's nothing. I think somebody from Rivian even reached out to tell us to take it easy. But it wasn't really. I think, look, we've talked about what I want the Rip from Yellowstone truck at some point in my life. I just can't fit it, and I can't park it anywhere in LA. And honestly, I would be dumb enough to buy it and then be like, I have nowhere to park it. And then I'd be like, sorry, kids, can't get out. If I had kids. Like, I thought we were getting ice
running
cream.
a boat dually package deal just to get rid of both of them.
I don't think I'd want to trailer my boat on a highway. I think that would scare the shit out of me. Okay.
Yeah, I don't
good
want
start.
to but no, not a Duke fan.
I know. Did you hear Duke got mad about the White Lotus dad wearing the Duke shirt?
That's what I thought of. Whenever I'd see those memes of that guy with the gun to his head and just the thing that jumps out is Duke. And it's like, they must not love that.
I think things have gone well. Yeah, I think enough stuff has gone well for Duke.
Yeah,
that they'll be okay.
Probably right.
Applications are down. Like, we had to let a kid in from Maine. All right.
Love
Am
Andy.
I mooching off my weird vibe today? Weird vibe. Maybe it's because it's super early.
It's 7:30. It's quiet in my I don't know.
All right. Look, maybe something beautiful will come of this. All right. Am I mooching off my future in-laws? 33, 5'9" and a half, 180, 225 bench, 305 squat, player comp, Luke Ridnour. High IQ on the court, can hold my own against better players, just average height and athleticism. I recently engaged my amazing fiance is 26. Hey, and we just closed in our first home together. What do you think is the best age gap number? Just a quick get it around the horn here.
Oof, I don't know.
Are you the same age, Kyle, as your wife?
No, she is like almost 3 years younger than me.
Same.
Your wife's 3 years younger than you, Ceruti?
Mm-hmm. No,
I don't know why I thought you were
like
the same age. For the weirdest, that's clearly on me. No one told me the wrong info or anything like that. But maybe I thought because like you'd both entered the PA program at the same time or something stupid, which is a dumb thing because it's not like everybody's the same age.
Yeah, I think I met her a few years in. She was, we would have never actually met in work. We met like through work people, essentially. But yeah, 3 years. I feel like 3 years is a reasonable gap.
What's the best second marriage age gap? I'm just kidding.
Nice.
I'm just kidding.
It's more than 3 years. It's not the same age. I'll tell you that. All right. Here we go. Life's good. I make about $175K a year and she makes $85K. And while we're financially comfortable, my dilemma, her parents seem determined to make sure we never pay for anything when we're with them. And I mean anything. Dinner, they got it. Golf with her dad, he won't even let me fake reach for my wallet. Vacations, we book our flights, but they cover hotels, food, and probably the air we breathe. They even loaned my fiance $10,000 for a down payment because the down payment was going to be all my money. Bought her a brand new $45,000 car last year, and we are chipping in $40,000 for our impending wedding. Oh, they are chipping in $40,000.
This is awesome.
And now they want to buy us a new grill as a housewarming gift because apparently the $10K wasn't enough of a present. Her parents are both in the late 50s, retired after very successful careers. Her dad owned a business that he sold, and her mom was a chief executive at a decent-sized company for many years. Maybe a CEO. They don't flaunt their wealth, but they're incredibly generous and seem to generally enjoy taking care of their family. For context, I grew up in the middle class where my parents pinch pennies to raise 3 kids. Since college, I've never asked my parents for a dime, take pride in paying my own way. So every time I offer to cover anything, they brush me off with a polite, okay, thanks for offering. It sort of makes me feel like a dirtbag mooch and almost some shame, warranted or not. I just can't help it. My fiance has an older sister, and in my view, they've both been very fortunate that their parents have always taken care of them. They paid for my fiance's undergrad, covered most of her master's degree. She has very little debt, and as mentioned, has never let her worry about big expenses. That said, she's not just coasting. She's worked through college, has a strong work ethic, currently holds 2 jobs. She's doing well in her career, will only continue to grow financially. They've done an amazing job raising her. She's just been blessed with more financial support than I ever had. How would you guys handle this? Kyle, you want to take the lead on this?
Sure. I mean, you've gone through this in college, and I think everybody learns this in college, but a lot of your stories are just like, a light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, people have just grown up totally different ways and it's totally fine. And that's the freshman guy in college who has the brand new Hummer and is like figured out a way to be able to drive it as a freshman. Like it just happens. It doesn't make them a bad person. I think this is someone who you've married who's just grown up a different way. And the truth of it is like your parents who would probably be like, why is this guy always letting me pay? Even if they were doing that, which you're saying that they pinch pennies. Her parents genuinely like this. This feels good to them. It maybe even feels not necessarily bad to them that you're always trying to pay, but it's like, this is what they want to use their money for. Clearly they've budgeted for enough. And, they want to use it for experiences with you guys. And it feels good for them to be like, oh, they got a new house that they gave your wife $10,000 for the down payment for. Also, we'd love for them to have a new grill. Like this is all stuff that they are enjoying doing. And I would say, it's who cares if it's not really an empty gesture when you reach for your wallet. Although I know some people do it and they just do it a little slower than everyone else. That's not what you're doing. So I think,
no.
Yeah, it's like, shit. So I think keep doing that. And then with that knowledge, you might feel better about it if you just spent the money that you are clearly budgeting in your head for all these things. You're like, all right, when the check comes, I'm prepared to lose $300 and you don't. maybe you just figure out a way to budget that money into something for the future and, build a little mother-daughter for your next house because you clearly are going to be the ones taking care of them. I think just find the good in this. I get that you were raised a way that makes you feel bad about this, but your wife was raised a way where I guess this is expected. So I just say cut it down the middle and be apathetic or slightly happy about it. Don't feel bad about this.
Yeah. I mean, I probably have two sets of parents who like to do this. And, you could, as you said, Kyle, you could take the wallet out, but it's never really going to actually matter. The way I feel like I get around it, or not get around it, but like at least pay it back is, do nice things for them. Make sure, you're keeping up with the FaceTimes and, all the stuff with the kids and the stuff that's not super fun. But also it's like a pay it forward thing. Like you're probably going to want to do that later in your life too. Like you want to be in a position where you're spoiling, your kids and their significant others and giving them better lives. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just part of like the life cycle. Like you're going to end up probably paying this back when you're in your 60s and whatever and retired, and hopefully your financial situation is good where you could do that.
Maybe though, but I think some people just look at it as like after a certain age, you're on your own, even if the adult has made a ton of money. I mean, it sounds like, I think the best part of this is that because you grew up the way that you did, you appreciate this so much. You've already told us that your wife, fiance, but future wife, busts her ass. It's not like she's just sitting around. Like sometimes I think about what I would have been like had I been a trust fund guy in comparison to like the other trust fund guys. Like would I have been, I mean, I wasn't all that, honestly, you could argue I acted like a trust fund guy without the trust fund for quite a while. Yeah.
Does this guy know who we are?
Yeah, no, seriously. Like what's he doing? He's just kind of chilling out for a little while,
He had a long semester.
And it doesn't really matter. Like you could say, like, this is where I just don't like putting everybody in the same category or everything. But like, I knew trust fund guys that had a job June after they graduated, and that was it. New York City, commute is on, working my way up. Granted, those guys probably had a better entry situation than some of the other dudes. And then, look, other guys, it was out to Jackson Hole, figure some things out. Like, what's he doing? Be like, I don't know. Have you heard of this thing called kombucha? He says he's got, I don't know. He says he wants to bring it east. I was like, all right, that seems, he's going to be just a beverage guy now. Like, yeah, he knows the wholesalers. Really? Okay.
Good for
He's
him.
also going to check out some widespread shows, but yeah, this kombucha thing feels pretty real. If you got 5-10 grand laying around. The paying it forward thing, you're right, Ceruti. But again, kind of back to the original point, the parents may, there can be somebody who's completely taken care of by the in-laws. And then when he has money and it's him out there with his daughter's fiance, it's like, I'm not doing shit for you guys. It's a complete philosophical approach. You may want to say to the dad and be like, I appreciate all these dinners. I appreciate the down payment. I appreciate the grill. But if you think I'm coming over and missing paddleboard to push your ass around 20 years from now, just what are you expecting in return? Look, there was a time, again, during the broke years where you at least wanted the person who was paying for stuff to think that you were going to offer, right?
Yeah, totally. Huge part
Huge part
of the dance.
You can probably just go to him now and be like, I want to offer, you don't have to do this, but maybe it's time to end the dance a little bit. And that was a big thing when some of the guys came back to visit and they had their hockey bonus money. And, I'd be sitting there like throwing a debit card down next to Amex,
the metal
Platinums. Right. Yeah. They weren't metal back then, but it would be like debit. The numbers would be like off. Honestly, I think I threw a couple expired ones in there a couple times just to be like, I hope it's not me. I hope it's not me.
I hope it's not me.
I'll wait. I threw in one that was just an absolute dud.
That's real credit card roulette, man.
Yeah, nobody knew. And you're sitting there going, well, I have to pretend I can handle this, but there's just, I was like, if they pick mine, I'm just going to have a little side chat over at the hostess station.
I'll find my guy. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I'm running to the bathroom quick. I got this. Hey, great night, guys. But I think the guys that what they're doing basically is maybe they're spending the inheritance they were going to give you anyway, too, on top of everything else. Like if they've really killed it, okay, Because it's going to get super annoying if you find out later on they just spent all this money and you're like, oh, and they're like, hey, can we move in with you guys? But if somebody's absolutely crushed it, there's an argument to be made that it makes way more sense to set up your fiance, set up her sister. Like sometimes when you look at the way inheritance works, and I don't understand how anybody really gets upset in talking about inheritance. Like some people are just going to luck out and some people aren't. But there's an argument for spending it now while you're younger and helping you get a head start, as opposed to like, oh, cool, now we're 65 and we get these checks from our parents, So look, just appreciate it, man, because you're in a great spot. But I also think you're in a great spot because your wife seems to understand it despite her financial advantages, and you're not taking it for granted, and it's just full appreciation. So high marks all around.
Yeah, I like the good gesture thing too. Like, you know what? Just like put in for those Masters tickets and surprise him. Like
there you go,
get
Kyle.
Carmelo's dad that Beretta. Get him the present. He's going to be like, holy crap. With all the money that you haven't spent because of doing stuff with them. Just really spend more time thinking about when those gift or good gesture moments present themselves. Like, how can you really crush that?
It's really probably time too. Like what spend money, give back with your time. They're going to appreciate that, I think, more than whatever the gift is. But at least that's how I know my parents look at it.
Okay. I thought this was a dream one, but it is also about a dream. So this isn't about Inception, but let's see if I can help here a little bit. All right. Longtime listener, first time emailer, 28, 5'11", and 3/4, formerly 6 feet. No pickup comp because I was cut by every basketball team I ever tried out for. About 6 months ago, one of my best friends from college, just call him Bubba, moved into my house in Philly after living in Chicago since graduating college. So he moved in 6 months ago, moved into his house, Philly, since he graduated college. So we're talking, this guy's got to be a little bit younger. I mean, unless he graduated later, but he's been working as an engineer, but about a year ago told our friend group he was looking at a career change and a move back to the East Coast. He and I discussed moving in with me since I'd had an open room in my house. While I was really excited about one of my best friends moving in, I was a little concerned with what his new career would be, ... Bubba had written a script for a sitcom during the dregs of COVID based on his experience living in Chicago post-graduation. All right, so it sounds like he's a couple years later if he was living in COVID post-graduation. See what we're saying here. He calls it a perfect hybrid of New Girl and Workaholics. I've read the pilot and some other episodes he's written and found it amusing, but not sure I'm qualified to judge, as my only experience in the entertainment industry is playing Lost Boy number 17 in my grade school's production of Peter Pan. You were great in that, though. You look so much more lost than the rest of the boys. His plan when moving to Philly was to work as a production assistant on various sets in the area and build relationships with people in the business. Quote, his brother works locally as a sound engineer on commercials, TV shows, and indie films, so he was able to get work as a PA relatively quickly. Granted, some of the sets he was working on had been commercials for kitchen appliance, super relevant experience. I don't know. Look, he's making connections. I remember when guys used to come and shoot the ESPN ads when one of the makeup ladies came over and combed my hair, like I was an extra in Leave It to Beaver, and I didn't realize. And then when the videos came back, I was like, Jesus Christ. That's when I had like enough hair to trick everybody. But it was like she did just a like 8-year-old picture day pictures. Good ad though. The ad was funny, and I was sitting there. Who knows? I had some dreams. I talked to the guy that was directing the commercial, and I was like, "What's up, man?" He's like, nothing. I was like, you working on this? He's like, oh, I have an indie thing I'm doing and, take it to some festivals and, I got to move back out west. This thing's paying the bills, but, and I was like, yeah, look at this guy. Look at us, couple creators thinking big picture. He makes $200 a day, but only averages about 5 working days per month. Ooh, okay. A lot of free time, though, to write. Bubba's given himself a runway of 1 year to make his TV show happen, hoping to film a pilot with the help of his connections he makes on a budget of around $20K. My biggest issue with his life choice is his level of commitment to the so-called dream. It feels like he's just dipping his toe into an industry where success can be so rare. I've asked him several times why he doesn't get a job like driving for Uber or DoorDash so he can extend his runway, or even take a writing class, join an improv group, try stand-up comedy, consider moving to Hollywood, literally anything to develop his skills and better his chance of making this work. He wants to star in this TV show, having never acted before, by the way. Ooh, All right. This guy's going the full workaholics experience. On some weekend nights, I'll ask if he wants to come out for some beers. The friends will say, nah, man, working on the script. Only for me to come home and find half a bottle of Woodford Reserve polished off.
Ooh.
Woodford's 2.
Nice.
Maybe that opens up the creative veins, man. As a landlord, I'm not too concerned about his creditworthiness because I was able to close on my house early 2021 before interest rates went bonkers. But as a friend, I can't help but be concerned about how this late 20s, so he is late 20s, crisis could potentially set Bubba back years professionally. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on the situation, especially you, Ryan, given your background and experience in the industry. Am I right to be worried as Bubba needs to start paying for LinkedIn Premium? All right. Well, look, I obviously have some experience in this, and I can't go over everything, but the whole runway thing, I did the exact same thing. Like when I left to come out here, I knew how much money I was going to guarantee to be make like the first year. And it was also like, hey, I at least want to buy some real estate in Manhattan Beach. And if I can't afford to live in this house after a year, then I'll just move and not live here. But at least I'll finally have bought a piece of property. And then, you know, who knows, maybe when I'm like 50, I get to finally move and see if I like it there. Because there's a really good chance if things didn't work out. Well, there's definitely a good chance if things didn't work out, I couldn't afford to live there. But I did a very similar thing of like, okay, well, I don't have to work that much. So, because I was doing one pod a week for ESPN. I was also doing one pod for Ringer before it was even Spotify. And the ESPN money was going to run out. And I knew that I wasn't going to make the same amount for ESPN once that expired, just because I wasn't doing a daily radio show anymore. They weren't going to pay me the same amount of money, which I'd already kind of known and understood. So I was like, okay, of all the different scenarios, like there was still one where I was like, hey, some version of this will work out enough that you're not going to have to move again. There was that, but I had to be open to the idea that it wasn't going to go that way. The other part of like, in 1 year, I have to have this done. I did it. It's one of the dumbest things that you can do. You have to, like, the world is, I've said this before, but it applies to screenwriting probably more than almost anything, but like that whole world is not like determined to match your fucking timeline. Okay. So the other thing that I think that I had to learn was that just even if you like, say your buddy writes a killer pilot, all right. I mean, chances are, but I don't know. Maybe he does. Maybe he's actually pretty good at this. Him wanting to star in it. Yeah, it's also alarming. You know, the workaholics thing worked. You want to know why? Because those guys are really funny. Like the three of those dudes are really funny. They have a very like natural dynamic with each other. Their comedic instincts are terrific. So I don't even know, you know, I think they were doing videos, right, Kyle? And then it kind of worked. I think that was their, I don't know if they wrote like a pilot and then they were going to do it. I thought those guys were like all in college together and were doing these videos and shit that just clearly kind of popped.
I came up in the Always Sunny school, so they have like a similar story, but I'm not really familiar with how Workaholics kicked off.
It's funny though, because like those kind of shows, I feel like every friend group is like, dude, we, you know, if you just filmed us in our trip to Vegas, like we could do that. We're hilarious. And like, I'm guilty of that. Probably.
Well, that's exactly what, your guy we had on the pod said is like, I can't tell you how many people are like, my workplace would be the perfect show. And he's like, let me just stop you right there.
Everybody thinks it, everybody does it. Because, you know, you see some stuff on TV. Like, it's kind of funny too, whenever you're like in a creative field, you can go, well, that thing sucked. You're like, so what are you saying? You're comparing your work to like just being slightly better than the thing you think is terrible. So that means because that was made that you think you have a good chance. So anyway, back to kind of like how this stuff works. You can write a really good pilot. It's a starting point, but it actually ends up being probably one of the most irrelevant parts of the timeline events. I know that sounds crazy and it's not entirely true, but you can write a really good pilot, but if nobody else with juice wants to make it, it's just a really good pilot that shows that you have skills that you could write. Maybe that pilot gets you on a writing staff, and maybe being on a writing staff for years leads to connections where you, on top of working on a TV show, are on the side working with somebody else or working by yourself on your own thing and your like the thing about writing that's really, really weird, especially screenwriting, because I think people just look at the final draft program and go, oh, this is like, I just have to write this sentence.
That looks so real.
Yeah. Or it's just like the number of words you're going like, I don't have to write like 75,000 words here. I could just kind of be like, this dude comes in, she laughs. hey, what the
he
hell?
makes a face, right?
Yeah, right. It's just the visual of looking at a script. Consider you can read like a 60-page script in 20 minutes. Probably you're like, oh, I could do that, but there's a little bit more to it. So you have to figure out how to hone that craft. And it sounds like he's trying to do that. And he's putting the hours in, but you then would need, if you have very little connections, because look, a studio saying yes to somebody, think about what they're really doing. They're going through all of the different things that they presented, and they are picking this thing based on somebody's track record or their vision. All right. And even if their vision or their writing is incredible, there still has to be somebody else that has a track record of success. That's a production company that goes, we actually do want to partner with this person, and then we want to make it. Okay. And then this is where the pilot part of it kind of becomes irrelevant. They're going to want you to map out kind of like 5 seasons. All right. And if you're lucky enough to even be invited to a pitch, you're going to have to, like when I had to pitch something that was a pretty big deal, I spent 4 days in my house, and I'd already written the script like 6 months prior. And I had the production company, I should say, that was established and got me in the room. And I had to have an answer for like 45 minutes on anything that could possibly happen with this show. And that's where you start writing your Bible. And that thing's like, I don't know, 100 pages long. It's like a sales document for storytelling of where this is going to go, because nobody goes, unless you're just the man and you've crushed it numerous times. You're like, hey, I think I have this show. Like Taylor Sheridan's like, I think I got this thing about lumberjacks. Every fucking network would be like, in.
Say no more, fam.
Done. Yeah. You had me at lumber. So most people, like, you can have the good pilot, but you're going to have a team with a track record, especially if you're an unknown. And you're going to have somebody believe in the vision of where your story is going for multiple seasons, because that's when people start making like real money. Nobody's like, oh, yeah, okay, well, like that first season sounds good, so we'll just trust you on season 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? I mean, limited series is an entirely different thing. And then they have to get through all that and even want to make the pilot. And then, of course, there's a decision after the pilot, because the people that are in charge of these shows have to answer to other people. And nobody will ever say, like, why did you guys greenlight this thing? It's a disaster. And you're like, well, the pilot was good, So look, and I know there's exceptions, and people that are way more involved in the industry day to day than I am may disagree with some of these things, but I'm just kind of trying to outline like the general part of it. So yeah, it's really, really hard. And I would say get rid of this whole 1-year deadline, because from the time you finish a really good pilot to having an agent read it, to a production company decide that they want to partner with you, to you go then and pitch and then hopefully sell and then rework the pilot and then the Bible, and then wonder the amount of time from the first sentence to when a camera would actually be rolling, that's years. And again, minus the exceptions of people that are just so established, the rules are different for them. But the rules for somebody who's never done this before, that has very little connections, the 1-year window thing is a fucking joke. You're not going to make it in 1 year, even if you are brilliant.
Well, so
unless again, maybe the indie part of it of like, hey, we're just going to go ahead and shoot this whole pilot. I'm going to start. I'm going to do this whole thing. Like, I hope you have somebody who's established who can go through it, because it's just shit you're not going to know. And the best thing for me was going through it, and I knew there was all these things that I didn't know, and I was like, you're going to learn that all of these things that you've assumed today, like years from now, you're going to be like, holy shit, I can't believe I thought that, or I can't believe. But I already knew it because I'd already gone through it in a whole different field. So I was like, you're totally naive. You don't have these answers, but you're aware that you don't have them. And that's actually like, that's better than never having gone through something special before. I'm sorry I jumped you there, Kyle, but what he's doing is really, really hard. But why do you care if he's paying his rent? I mean, I guess you care as a friend. Let him fail.
Yeah, maybe you keep your mouth shut until the 1-year deadline of just, maybe you should start moonlighting as a TV show writer that doesn't get paid for it. Like, maybe at that certain point if it's hard for you to see him on the couch every single day and not doing anything, which, at a certain point someone could say, mind your own business, You know, if the electricity and the rent's getting paid on time, I mean, mind your own business. But if you're saying as a friend, I don't feel good about watching this guy do something that clearly on the outside I think is doing the wrong way, but I don't really know anything about this business. Maybe you wait until he's done with his 1 year runway, and then you can be like, hey man, have you thought about like, here's some writers that were waiting tables until they got their thing picked up. Maybe you should start doing something else as well. Maybe that's a good way to break it in, because it doesn't sound like, you know, you're like, and he's just sitting around all day and he's constantly late on the rent. It's just you're worried that he's like going to look up and be like, I haven't had any work experience for 4 years and I can't even get a regular job that's decent. And still nobody wants my pilot. So I don't know, maybe wait till your 1 year runway and still find a way to be supportive and just be like, you know, a lot of these dudes have another gig as well. Like you can't just keep tweaking the same script and eventually someone's gonna be like, that's the tweak. We want it now. All your dreams are coming true. So maybe you find a way near that 1 year runway endpoint where you can, you know, suggest to, you know, find something else to fill his days and, you know, sort of a backup plan.
Yeah. I think we've had buddies who, you know, you're like, hey, is this kind of the right path for our guy? And as collectively as the other members of the friend group, you're like, what do we do? Do we say something? Like, you just got to let it play out. You know, don't let it play out too long, but a year, you know, if he wants to do this thing for a year and, you know, it's probably fair game then to hop back in and be like, hey, dude, what are you doing? But I don't know, because if you do it too early, then it's like, hey, do you not believe in me? Are you really my friend? And like, it creates all these issues. And I'm just kind of like, hey, let people make their mistakes kind of thing. I mean, if the guy really, really needs help and he's like floundering in life and doesn't have any direction after several years, you're like, yeah, all right, this is maybe the time to have an intervention and step in. But you got to let people fail. You got to let people fall on their faces. And, you know, if he wants advice, if he opens up to you ever, then like maybe go in for it and take that opening. But it's just a delicate thing, because then it's like, hey, do you not believe in me? Like, you know, I don't know. I don't think you want to go down that road.
Yeah, it's really hard, man. It's really hard. Like, I remember in the beginning when I lived out here, and I would finish something and I would send it to one of my agents, and he'd be like, "Hey, this is pretty good." I'd be like, "All right, you know, like, when do we meet with HBO?" You know, like, I know a guy over there, and it's like, we could go meet with him, but like, you're just gonna be wasting everybody's time. Wasting your time. You'd be really wasting their time. And so
there's a world where he can be just as passionate about however long he's actually sitting in front of the laptop or the sketch pad. You know what I mean? Because it sounds like that trails off at some point and our guy gets home from the bars and, you know, he's asleep on the couch with an open bottle of whiskey. Like, there's a world where that guy can be as passionate about as he is about sitting around all day, just between 7 and 9 p.m. after, you know, he's decompressed from his job for an hour or two. Like, there is a world where in his mind, that's cool too. Like, I'm really grinding to make this, and maybe he just hasn't tried that. Maybe that is the same amount of work he would have done anyway, which, you know, I don't know the answer to that.
No, it's a great point as we finish up here, because there's nothing better than saying you're a writer as an excuse to not do anything on the side.
Right.
You know, you're like, oh, I gotta go over this scene again. And then you're like, all right, let me get 30 minutes Call of Duty, and then
refresh.
Then we're this,
Then we're like, okay, now we're hot. Let's turn on some tunes. Be like, all right, cursor, what do we got tonight? All right, that'll do it for the show. Thanks to Wargon. Thanks to Jonathan Frias. Thank you to Kyle and Ceruti. Ryen Russillo podcast, video pod on Spotify app, and of course our YouTube page. So please subscribe. Ryen Russillo podcast on your Spotify. Must be 21 and older and present in select states. For Kansas, in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in D.C. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit rg-help.com. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York.